In the weeks following Bruno's miraculous reunion with Harold, his story had taken on a life of its own, one that touched the hearts of many in town. Now, Bruno's fate was to be decided once again at a charity auction held in a grand opulent hall meant to raise funds for local animal rescue. The ornate venue was filled with America's elite, businessmen, politicians, and socialites in tailored suits and shimmering gowns, their laughter and clinking champagne glasses echoing under a massive chandelier. But amid the glittering extravagance, a stark scene awaited. A frail, aged German shepherd, his eyes reflecting both pain and unwavering loyalty. His name was Bruno, and he had once been a heroic working dog whose scars told a story of survival against all odds. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Bruno's tale was well known to a few compassionate souls in town, especially to Sarah Johnson, a gentle soul with a heart as vast as the prairies, and Dorothy, a warm neighbor who had watched Bruno's transformation from near abandonment to a beacon of hope. Dr. Colin, the kind yet determined veterinarian who had overseen Bruno's recovery, had even testified to his remarkable resilience. Yet as the auctioneer cleared his throat and introduced the next lot, Lot 47, a distinguished German shepherd, once in service now in need of a loving home, he announced, his voice wavering slightly as he described Bruno's past glories and present frailty. An initial bid of $115,000 was met with a momentary hush among the glitterati. But as the bidding continued, snide whispers rippled through the crowd. "A washed-up dog, too scarred to serve anymore," muttered one sharply dressed man, while others scoffed, dismissing Bruno as nothing more than a relic of a bygone era. The tension in the room mounted until, from the back of the hall, a modest bid rang out a mere $500. The room erupted in derision. "Is this some sort of joke?" a wealthy bidder sneered. "For $500, you can't even buy a decent bottle of wine, let alone a service dog." Amid the laughter, a voice from an unexpected corner cut through the derision. A young man, unassuming in his worn denim jacket and scuffed boots, stepped forward. His eyes, filled with a fierce sincerity, met those of the auctioneer, and he calmly stated, "I'll bid $1,000. The room fell silent, the elite murmuring among themselves in disbelief. Though he was an outsider to their world of wealth and privilege, his earnestness struck a chord with everyone who believed in the sanctity of life and loyalty. As the final gavel fell, and the auctioneer reluctantly declared, "Sold for $1,000, a bitter voice erupted from the back of the room. A man, known to be a local business tycoon with a pristine reputation, scoffed, "That mutt? I got rid of him days ago." His words, laden with cruelty, sent a wave of shock through the hall. Dr. Colin's calm voice soon broke in, confirming that Bruno's microchip was indeed registered to this very man. The revelation was as chilling as it was unexpected. Someone respected and trusted in the community had abandoned his loyal companion in a moment of callous neglect. Sarah's heart tightened as she recalled Bruno's past, a life of service and sacrifice, a life nearly snuffed out by indifference. With steady resolve, she stepped forward. "This dog deserves a chance at life," she declared, her voice quivering with a mix of anger and compassion. "He deserves to be loved, not discarded." The murmurs grew louder, the crowd divided between outrage and stunned silence. Dorothy, standing beside Sarah, nodded in agreement. In a dramatic twist that no one could have predicted, the auction committee, moved by Sarah's impassioned plea and the overwhelming evidence of Bruno's remarkable spirit, ruled that the rejected owner's claim would be void. "He is not for sale to those who would neglect him," Dr. Colin pronounced, her voice firm and resolute. "Bruno is now under the care of someone who truly understands his worth." With those words, the atmosphere in the grand hall shifted. The elite's laughter and derision faded, replaced by a quiet, collective respect for the man who had bought Bruno not for wealth, but for love. The young man whose identity, though modest, carried the weight of genuine compassion stepped forward and embraced Bruno. In that moment, as the crowd watched in silence, Bruno's eyes shone with a glimmer of renewed hope, a spark that had been ignited by a love that transcended status and prejudice. The story of Bruno's unexpected rescue resonated deeply with all who heard it. especially those who understood that true worth is measured not by material wealth, but by the capacity for love, loyalty, and sacrifice. In our modern, often cynical world, this tale serves as a powerful reminder that even when the world seems determined to cast aside the vulnerable, the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. For Sarah, Dorothy, Dr. Colin, and for everyone in that opulent hall, Bruno's journey was proof that miracles can come from the unlikeliest of places, a testament to the unbreakable bond between a dog and the man who saw beyond appearances, offering him a second chance at life and love. Sarah Johnson had always been a person who sought purpose in the quiet things: a walk with a friend, a conversation over a cup of tea. But ever since she had made the decision to take Bruno home, a profound connection had formed between them. He was no longer just a dog. He had become an embodiment of resilience. Now, as winter turned to spring, Sarah found herself looking at the horizon more times than she could count, wondering where his past had intersected with his present. That thought persisted for weeks, poking at her mind like a splinter that had yet to be removed. Something about Bruno's haunted eyes, the weight of his hesitation to trust, made Sarah wonder if there were shadows still lurking from his past life. She had given him love, safety, even a home, but she couldn't help but wonder how much of his history he remembered and how much he had been forced to forget. One chilly evening, after another long day of running errands, Sarah stood at her kitchen window, cradling a mug of hot tea and gazing over the farm's fields. Bruno, who had once been so disconnected, now lay beside her on the wicker chair. She had seen him gradually let go of the tension from his previous life, step by step. Yet something told her that the transition wasn't over. The past is never quite gone, is it? Sarah murmured quietly to herself, her gaze drifting back to the old barn, its silhouette stark against the night sky. Just as she was about to sit down, the silence of the evening was broken by a faint noise coming from the woods behind the barn. Bruno, who had been dozing peacefully, suddenly lifted his head, his ears pricking up at the disturbance. Sarah's chest tightened with a sudden, inexplicable anxiety. "What's out there, boy?" she whispered, just as she noticed Bruno's body tensing up. He rose cautiously and padded toward the door, a low growl rumbling from deep within his chest. A wave of unease washed over Sarah. She had heard stories of trespassers in the area, theft, vandalism, people with unstable intentions who sometimes wandered too far from the town. But this felt colder, something deeper stirring inside her, something familiar to Bruno, if his instincts meant anything. Liam Carter had been in the same position just over a year ago. As a young man new to the town of Westfield, his life had been riddled with unknowns until he met Spike, once a former Police 9, now nearly broken from years of service that stretched far beyond the limits of endurance. That night, there had been no easy path to follow, no familiar footsteps to guide him. Like Sarah, Liam had thrown his lot in with a dog who had trusted no one, but for different reasons he simply believed in second chances and the undeniable connection between man and animal. He didn't expect anything grand, no accolades or heroes welcome. But like Sarah, there was an unshakable spirit inside him that called him to protect, even if he had yet to fully understand what he was protecting from. The day Liam picked up Spike at the charity auction, he had been met with sarcasm, ridicule from the so-called elite wealthy individuals who viewed the world through the opulent lens of detachment, treating the animal as a discarded tool rather than the living being he truly was. There was no time for their scorn to stinge his pride. At his side, and to the surprise of every onlooker, Spike, a former K-9 officer, had begun to let go of the years spent denying anything but professional loyalty. For the first time in a long time, the dog lifted his head, staring at Liam with eyes that asked, "Are we safe now?" Liam braved the outside world with Spike's slack against his side, not minding his new companionship. What mattered was that the bond they shared already felt stronger than the forces that had worked so hard at breaking them. Hours later, that had turned into a simple conversation for both, an understanding that made Spike's breath shakier than in ages past. Though Sarah couldn't begin to follow that story exactly, she understood, in ways words often fall short, how Spike's unrelenting affection for his newfound friend was sparked by shared loyalty, not a new leash. But even in the privacy of what seemed like a newfound life for Spike, Emotions extended like deep shadows, familiar enough that the pace of Sarah's world couldn't easily fit things, and yet it felt just right here. It only took one night after that subtle instinct played out her farm, his hours spent tirelessly managing. That very night, her barn side, that thin breath caught. For 57 seconds, Sarah Johnson's heart thumped with a mix of hope and trepidation as she pulled her old pickup to a stop at a small, weathered ranch house on the outskirts of town. The sky above Montana was streaked with the soft hues of dawn, yet an uneasy chill still clung to the air. After the dramatic auction that had changed Bruno's fate forever, Sarah now found herself beginning a new chapter 1 that promised healing but also carried shadows from a past she was only beginning to understand. She stepped out of the truck, her boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground as she called softly, "Come on, Bruno, welcome home." The loyal German shepherd, whose once vibrant eyes had softened with suffering and rejection, slowly leapt down from the truck. Yet he did not wag his tail with the exuberance of a newly adopted pet. Instead, Bruno paused, sniffing the cold air, his dark eyes steady and almost haunted, as if he were waiting, watching, unsure whether this was real. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice tender yet determined. "I don't know what they did to you, boy, but you're safe now." Bruno stared at her for long moments. Then, in a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed, he slowly placed his paw on her knee. It was the first sign of trust they had shared, a delicate bridge over years of neglect and hardship. Neither Sarah nor Bruno knew it yet, but that quiet, frozen night was only the beginning. Somewhere, far beyond the edge of the ranch, someone from Bruno's shadowed past was watching, and they were not finished with him. Later that evening, as Sarah sat on the creaking porch with a steaming cup of coffee, the Montana sunrise painted the horizon in surreal shades of orange and purple. Yet her eyes remained fixed on Bruno. He sat a few feet away, still as if lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the distant barn and the endless fields that melted into the darkness. Every time Sarah shifted in her worn, creaky chair, she could almost hear the faint click of Bruno's nails against the wooden floor, a subtle reminder of his restless vigilance. A cold shudder ran down Sarah's spine when, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a fleeting shadow near the barn, a tall, motionless figure watching from afar. Her pulse quickened. She edged toward the window, her hand shaking as she fumbled for the rifle she kept for protection. Though not a paranoid soul, Sarah had learned that in the vast openness of Montana, trouble often crept in when least expected. She moved quietly to the window and peered out into the swirling mist. At first, there was nothing but the desolate barn and the swaying fence. Then, in the murk, a shadow lingered, a solitary figure that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Bruno's ears twitched, and Sarah's heart pounded with a foreboding that something was terribly amiss. After ensuring the doors were securely locked, Sarah returned inside and sank onto the couch, her thoughts a maelstrom of fear and determination. Bruno lay beside her, his eyes half open and alert despite his fragile state. Unable to shake the uneasy feeling, Sarah reached for her laptop. With trembling fingers, she typed in the number from Bruno's microchip, a number she had seen on the auction papers. What she found sent a chill down her spine, an obituary for Sergeant Victor Reynolds, a decorated K-9 officer who had been murdered a year ago during a raid. The article mentioned that the officer's loyal dog had been present that fateful night. Sarah's blood ran cold. Could it be that Bruno had been there? That he had witnessed something so dark that it had left scars both visible and unseen? Her mind raced as she absorbed the implications. The respected local businessman who had once owned Bruno, a man Sarah had never imagined capable of such cruelty, had abandoned him without a second thought. Rage and sorrow intertwined in her heart as she murmured, "Who did this to you, Bruno?" Determined not to let the past cast a permanent shadow over his future, she resolved to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That night, as the wind howled outside and the clinic's fluorescent lights bathed the room in an eerie glow, Sarah sat with Bruno on a worn rug in the corner of the treatment room. Dorothy, a longtime friend with a gentle soul and a heart full of empathy, had joined her. Together, they whispered words of comfort to Bruno, promising that he would never be returned to the hands that had forsaken him. Dr. Colin, whose steady presence had soothed many in their final moments, assured them that Bruno was stabilizing his frail body, slowly responding to the warm blankets and IV fluids. But Sarah's mind was already churning with plans. "We're going to uncover who did this," she vowed softly, her eyes never leaving Bruno's tired, yet determined gaze. "And we'll make sure that no one else has to suffer the way you did." It was a promise born of deep personal conviction, a pledge that the brutal past would not dictate his future. In the following days, as the community learned of Bruno's tragic history and his miraculous rescue, Sarah and Dorothy, together with Dr. Colin, began gathering clues. Every whispered conversation, every reluctant confession, and every silent nod of understanding from those who remembered Sergeant Reynolds painted a picture of betrayal and neglect that shocked the town. And amid that turbulent quest for justice, Bruno's gentle spirit shone as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in a world rife with cruelty, a single act of compassion could ignite a spark of resilience. Sarah's journey to unravel the mystery behind Bruno's past was unpredictable and perilous, but she moved forward with unwavering determination. Her own pain, etched deeply from years of loss and hardship, only fueled her desire to bring healing, not just to Bruno, but to everyone affected by the injustice of an uncaring world. In her heart, she believed that true loyalty and compassion had the power to mend even the deepest wounds, proving that every soul, no matter how broken, deserved a second chance. Sarah Johnson sat back in her quiet, dimly lit office, the air thick with tension. The streets outside her window were eerily still as the wind howled, adding to the ever-present unease in her chest. She had thought their battle to keep Bruno safe had ended with his rescue, but now, as the helicopter spins closer to their destination, she felt the storm was far from over. Not physically, of course. Bruno was lying beside her, his mended and scarred body softening to the normal measures of life and trust over time. But mentally, she still watched with suspicion. She had barely time to grieve or adjust the unjust whispers she'd gotten after admitting her official choice that day. Lies brushed beneath suspicion now. Terror had disguised much like happiness had. However, rush quickly after wasn't adding contentment. Across town, Sheriff Tom Grayson leaned back in his sunlit office when Liam unexpectedly slid forward, paying him his respect, to cut open his curious silence mussback for 53 seconds. Sarah Johnson's world had changed forever since the night she rescued Bruno from the icy grip of neglect. Now, weeks later, as winter's chill still clung to the Montana air, an anonymous call shattered the fragile peace of her newfound life. The voice on the other end was gruff and urgent. "I need information on Officer Victor Reynolds." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew that name well, Officer Reynolds, a decorated cop whose life had been brutally cut short a year ago, and whose loyal K-9 partner, it turned out, was none other than Bruno. Sitting in her modest living room, Sarah relayed the call to Dorothy, her longtime friend and confidant. Dorothy's eyes widened as she recalled the whispered rumors circulating in town. "I haven't heard that name in ages," she said softly. Reynolds was a hero, and Bruno, well, Bruno was his partner until the raid that ended his life. The revelation sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Bruno, who had once been so resilient and brave, had a past steeped in danger and sacrifice, a past that someone now wanted to dredge up. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah turned to Dr. Colin, the compassionate veterinarian who had helped save Bruno from certain death. "Do you know anything about Officer Reynolds?" she asked, voice trembling as she stroked Bruno's soft, graying fur. Dr. Colin's face grew somber. "I did some research," she explained quietly. "Bruno's microchip indicates that he was registered as Officer Reynolds' K-9 partner. After the fatal raid, something changed in him. He became unpredictable, almost aggressive, as if burdened by the trauma of that night. The implications were as unpredictable as they were chilling. Someone, it seemed, was still connected to that dark day, and now that someone was snooping around Sarah's property. Late one evening, as Sarah sat on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee, the Montana sunrise painted the horizon with tentative hues of orange and purple. Yet the serene beauty of the morning was marred by a palpable tension, a sense that they were not alone. Bruno, usually a gentle presence, paced restlessly near the back door. His ears twitched at every sound, and his dark eyes were fixed on the distant barn that bordered Sarah's property. Sarah's pulse quickened as she recalled Dr. Collins' words. Bruno had changed after that fateful raid. Now, as if in response to an unseen threat. Unable to shake the growing unease, Sarah moved cautiously toward the window. In the faint light, she saw a shadow flit past the barn, a tall, indistinct figure. Her hand automatically reached for the rifle she kept for protection. But before she could react further, a muffled thud on the porch sent Bruno into a low, warning growl. The sound was brief, yet its impact was profound. It confirmed that someone was out there, watching, waiting. Heart pounding, Sarah rejoined Dorothy and Dr. Collin in the clinic's small office, where they convened to discuss the unsettling developments. "This isn't just about Bruno's past," Dorothy murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "It's about a conspiracy, a cover-up. Officer Reynolds wasn't simply killed in the line of duty. There are whispers that someone on the inside set him up. And Bruno, being the only witness, is the missing link." Dr. Collins' eyes narrowed as she reviewed the records on her laptop, connecting the dots of a case that had long been shrouded in mystery. "If we don't act now," she warned softly, "the same people may come looking for Bruno and for you." The threat was no longer abstract, it was tangible. That night, as the wind howled outside like a chorus of lost souls, Sarah sat in her truck with Bruno resting uneasily on the passenger seat. The road ahead was dark and treacherous, the headlights barely piercing the heavy mist. Every bump on the frozen pavement sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She knew that somewhere out there, someone from that sinister past was drawing closer. Suddenly, as the truck rumbled along a deserted stretch near her ranch, Sarah's phone buzzed with an alert, a text from an unknown number reading, "They're coming for him." Her blood ran cold. Without hesitation, she pulled off the road and parked under a gnarled pine, its branches heavy with snow. The silence that followed was oppressive, each second stretching into an eternity. Bruno's ears perked up, his body tense and alert, as if anticipating an imminent threat. Then, as if summoned by the very storm around them, a dark figure emerged from the swirling snow near the barn. Sarah's pulse thundered in her chest as she reached for her rifle. The figure moved slowly at first, then with an unsettling urgency, as if trying to send a message. Bruno barked furiously, his deep resonant growl a challenge to the intruder. Sarah's eyes darted between the approaching shadow and the trembling form of Bruno, her mind racing with a mix of fear and determination. A flash of movement, then the intruder lunged toward the truck. Instinct took over as Sarah fired a warning shot, the sound echoing into the night. The figure staggered back, and in that split second, Bruno sprang into action, leaping from the truck with surprising agility. With a burst of ferocious energy, Bruno lunged at the intruder, his powerful jaws sinking into the man's arm before he could even draw his weapon. A cry tore through the silence, a mix of anger and fear, and the assailant stumbled, his retreat marked by clattering footsteps on the snow. Sarah's grip on her rifle tightened as she peered into the darkness, searching for more signs of danger. The storm raged on, but in the midst of the chaos, one truth remained clear. Bruno's loyalty, forged in the fires of a painful past and deep sacrifice, was now the shield that would protect them both. As the intruder disappeared into the swirling night, Sarah exhaled shakily, her heart pounding with relief and the grim resolve to uncover the truth behind Officer Reynolds' mysterious death. In that perilous moment, as she sat in her truck with Bruno at her side, Sarah understood that life, unpredictable and often cruel, still held the promise of redemption and justice. She vowed to dig deeper, to unearth the secrets of the past and protect the innocent legacy of a heroic dog. And as the harsh Montana night slowly gave way to the faint glow of dawn, Sarah knew that true loyalty embodied in Bruno's fierce, unyielding spirit would always be worth fighting for. Sarah Johnson felt the weight of the world on her shoulders when she received a call from the sheriff's office. She was no stranger to danger, having witnessed Bruno's life-saving acts and weathered the storm unraveled by his past. But this call, delivered in hushed, urgent tones, was different. Someone was after Spike, the loyal German shepherd who had earned nothing but rejection and scorn from the very people who should have protected him. Sitting with Bruno at the ranch, Sarah's thoughts could not help but drift back to the canine's difficult journey. The night she had rescued him from a future forgotten at an auction, she knew his battle with his past wasn't over. The stake was far higher now. She still remembered the day she first met Bruno, the once vibrant shepherd injured from his years of service as a police dog. His reticence and painful history screamed substitute service for companionship. But Sarah had a deeper understanding of loyalty, of second chances, of the fight for survival. In the darkness of a quiet Montana ranch, she pieced together a tale that seemed unfamiliar, yet familiar, like the words of someone long lost. Sarah reached for the phone, dialing the sheriff's number. When his gravelly voice answered, her throat tightened with urgency. "I need information about a cop, Victor Reynolds," Sarah demanded. Sheriff Grayson, as calm as always, reacted unexpectedly. "He was murdered over a year ago, but who's asking?" He paused. "What the hell are you mixed up in, girl?" "I think someone connected to that death was snooping around my place," she replied, her voice tight. Grayson let out a long sigh. "Well, that doesn't make it any easier for you, Carter. But what would you expect? You've stirred a hornet's nest." She could hear the discouragement in his voice. The weight of something much bigger than the past she thought she understood had just settled, and she knew it was spiraling into something more dangerous. "Liam Carter," she murmured. She had heard the stories, the whispers about the connections within the community. Reynolds' death, the botched drug bust, K9 Spike's involvement. A memory simmered uneasily in her mind, a clue leading into the storm threatening them all. Spike wasn't just a dog, Grayson's voice deepened. He was a Link Reynolds K9 companion, the only other witness to a mess that runs deeper than we could have thought. The sudden realization hit Sarah hard. What do we do now? Meanwhile, in the hospital clinic, Dr. Collin had answered Sarah's distress with her usual calm professionalism. She shared facts as they were with a speck of sympathy. Sarah wasn't sure if even the vet could understand her anxiety fully in the face of this monumental secrecy, but Sarah remained determined to redeem the dog's legacy. Spike deserved more than being haunted by a past gone wrong, and something in her gut told Sarah that Spike had seen a darkness, something beneath the surface of every carefully crafted document. Later, that evening, Sarah's fear found reality. Spike was unfamiliar with safety, uncertain even now. In simple moments, it appeared that Spike shared her tension, an uneasy companion straining for answers, like two storm-tossed boats bracing for more waves. He paced restlessly, staying by her side as though awaiting something impossible, and it tugged at Sarah's resolve. Liam stood to the side of his modest living room, staring at Spike. Thoughts swirled through his mind, bits of the night that had already been tainted by violence. His grip tightened. There was a fear that crept up inside him when he recalled the face of the man he killed that evening. When the intruder crumbled beneath the blast, the words echoing through the dark room were clear. "You think that dog is washed up? He's seen something that no one should." The words replayed in Liam's ears. They burned. He had shot a man with a purpose, but now that same man had left him with too many questions. There was probably someone still behind the shadows trying to erase Spike's truth. Was it about loyalty? Or had Spike witnessed the dark hand that controlled this rat race of treachery? What's the story? But before trailers were shut, the details started spinning. Every uncontrollable moment sent bruising chills filling the silhouette of Montana's night. The fractures in the small porcelain town led back toward the possibility that men like Reynolds had a past steeped in power, hidden in plain sight. "Liam, you've screwed up," Grayson reminded. Later, deep into the folds of a chilling morning, bits of midnight fantasy twisted again. That ranch was now overdrawn with impending thunderstorms uniquely etched into the landscape by consequences raised over twin lives, their history together woven one step longer inside betrayals leading nowhere. Leaning back in his truck, headlights flashing softly, he finally caught an inclination running toward human lives, closing circle tight. Yeah, for one M16S. Sarah Johnson's pulse raced as she stepped off her truck into the icy twilight at her modest ranch on the outskirts of town. The air was crisp with the lingering chill of winter, and as she surveyed the familiar yet desolate landscape, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly amiss. Bruno, her loyal German shepherd, now a symbol of resilience and rebirth after his miraculous rescue, stood silently beside her, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that belied his frail condition. Though Bruno had been given a second chance after being abandoned and nearly left to die, Sarah sensed that shadows from his past were still creeping close. After an hour on the road, Sarah's truck rumbled to a stop in front of a weathered ranch house. The place was old but lovingly maintained, with a faded barn looming in the distance and endless fields stretching into the darkness. Sarah opened the truck door and softly called, "Come on, Bruno, welcome home." Bruno jumped down and sniffed the air. He wasn't wagging his tail with unbridled joy, but rather he moved with a measured caution, as if he were waiting for something, watching the world with guarded anticipation. Sarah knelt beside him and gently stroked his matted fur. "I don't know what they did to you," she murmured, "but you're safe now." Bruno stared back at her, his eyes unreadable, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he placed a paw on her knee. It was a small gesture, but in that instant, Sarah understood it was the first sign of trust, bridging the gap between his painful past and the hope of a new beginning. As dusk gave way to night, the wind outside howled, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Sarah sat on her porch with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the Montana sunrise paint the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and purple. Yet, her eyes remained fixed on Bruno, who sat a few feet away, staring into the distance as if lost in thought. His stillness was unusual, even for a dog who had known hardship. He had barely slept, and every time Sarah shifted in her creaky rocking chair, she thought she heard the soft click of his nails against the wooden porch floor, a quiet rhythm that hinted he was waiting for something, or perhaps someone. That night, Sarah awoke suddenly to an eerie silence that replaced the usual creaks and whispers of the ranch. Bruno was standing by the window, his ears perked and his body tense, as if sensing a presence in the darkness. With a slow, deliberate motion, Sarah reached for the rifle she kept in the closet. Though she was not typically paranoid, living alone in the vast Montana countryside had taught her to be ever vigilant. She moved quietly to the window and peered out. At first, all she saw was the empty barn, a solitary fence swaying in the wind, and the endless fields. But then a shadow, a tall, motionless figure stood near the barn, watching. Her grip on the rifle tightened as Bruno let out a low, controlled growl, his instincts clearly alerting him to danger. Before Sarah could fully process the sight, heart pounding, she whipped around, rifle raised and eyes scanning the darkened entryway. Seconds later, the door burst open. A figure dressed in black, masked and armed, charged into the room with dangerous intent. In a split second, Sarah fired a warning shot. The blast echoed through the silent ranch, sending the intruder stumbling back. But as she steadied her aim, another shadow emerged from the darkness. Bruno, reacting with the speed and ferocity of his former training days, lunged forward like a bolt of lightning. In an explosive moment of instinct and courage, Bruno clamped his powerful jaws onto the second attacker's arm before he could even reach for his weapon. A cry of pain and fury split the air as the man collapsed, thrashing wildly in an attempt to break free. Bruno's ferocity, fueled by a lifetime of loyalty and the echoes of past betrayals, was relentless. Sarah fired again, her hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins, and the attacker crumpled to the ground, leaving the intruder's assailant to retreat hastily into the darkness. Breathing heavily, Sarah scanned the property, rifle still in hand. The storm's wind howled as if in mourning, and every crunch of snow underfoot heightened her tension. She recalled a conversation from earlier that day with Sheriff Grayson, who had warned her that someone connected to the tragic death of Officer Victor Reynolds, Bruno's former handler, might be seeking to silence any lingering witnesses. The memory of Reynolds' murder, shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors of betrayal within the force, now loomed ominously in her mind. It was said that after the fatal raid, Bruno's partner had been left to die, and Bruno, the only witness, had paid a heavy price for that secret. Now, with the intruders at her door, Sarah feared that the same dark forces were at work. Later that night, as the echoes of the violent encounter subsided, Sarah sat in her dimly lit study with Dorothy and Dr. Collin by her side. They pored over old records and pieced together fragments of conversations overheard at local gatherings. "Officer Reynolds wasn't just a casualty," Dorothy said softly, her voice tinged with both sorrow and determination. There were whispers that someone on the inside wanted him dead, and that Bruno saw it all. "Doctor," Collin nodded gravely as she reviewed the data. Bruno's microchip confirms his service record with Reynolds' unit. And now, the fact that someone tried to kill him, our Bruno, is no coincidence. It's as if they're trying to erase the truth. Sarah's mind churned with conflicting emotion. The ruthless actions of these unknown enemies, those willing to eliminate a loyal dog to keep a dark secret buried, filled her with anger and a fierce resolve. "We can't let them win," she declared, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Bruno has already suffered too much. We must find out who's behind this and make sure they're held accountable." The gravity of her words settled over the trio as they listened to the faint, rhythmic beeps of the clinic's monitors still echoing from earlier that night, a solemn reminder of the fragility of life and the strength of unbreakable bonds. Dorothy's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she recalled the old stories of heroism and sacrifice, of a bond between man and dog that had withstood even the most brutal trials. Dr. Colin, ever the calm pillar of strength, promised to help Sarah piece together the clues, her analytical mind already racing through possibilities. Outside, the Montana night deepened, blanketing the ranch in a shroud of uncertainty. Yet inside, amidst the tension and the palpable fear, a spark of hope began to glow. Sarah Johnson, with Bruno's steadfast presence by her side, resolved to confront the shadows of the past. She would not allow the legacy of Officer Reynolds and his loyal canine partner to be erased by those who thrived on secrecy and cruelty. With every fiber of her being, Sarah vowed that Bruno would be protected, that his story and the truth behind Reynolds' untimely death would not be forgotten. As dawn approached, the first hints of a fragile new day emerged in the soft light, and Sarah's determination only grew stronger. The journey ahead was fraught with danger and unpredictability, but one thing was clear: the unyielding power of loyalty and love, embodied in Bruno's steadfast eyes, and the unwavering support of those who cared, would light the way through even the darkest nights. And as the Montana sunrise broke over the endless fields, Sarah knew that in the battle for truth and justice, she and Bruno were not alone. They were a beacon of hope, a reminder that sometimes the most profound acts of courage come from those who dare to stand up against the tide of darkness, and that true loyalty, once forged, can never be extinguished. Sarah Johnson sat on the rickety porch of her small Montana home, the evening's chill still lingering under the vast sky. The land stretched endlessly, untouched by time, and in the distance, the winding path that led back to town seemed as still and empty as the feeling creeping into Sarah's heart. Bruno, the loyal German shepherd she had rescued from certain death, sat by her feet, his tired eyes scanning the horizon. It had been weeks since their lives had collided, weeks since she had taken him home, but tonight felt different, tense. She could feel the weight of his past hanging in the air around them. The quiet was unsettling, as if something was coming, something neither of them could ignore. She glanced down at Bruno. His strong body, once destroyed by trauma, now seemed restless. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by the same unease Sarah felt beyond the walls of her home. She reached out, letting her hand gently stroke the rough fur beneath his neck, hoping to comfort him as much as she needed the comfort. Spike, she reminded herself. Bruno wasn't the only one haunted by cruel histories. Spike, the former K-9 officer whose life had mirrored just as much darkness during the devastating murder of his handler, Officer Reynolds. And now, those who wanted the truth buried were hunting them down. Earlier that morning, Sarah had talked to Sheriff Grayson in his dusty, cluttered office. He had spoken in whispers of things she couldn't fully comprehend. He had read between the lines of history and had heard the unspoken whispers of betrayal, senseless violence, and secrets someone would kill to keep hidden. Reynolds didn't die on that raid, Sarah, Grayson had said softly, his voice thick with frustration. If we want the truth, we need that dog. And we need it before they find him and you. Sarah had no idea where this would all lead, but her gut told her whatever she and Bruno had become a part of was more dangerous than she could have ever anticipated. Tonight, there was undeniable tension in the air, but Sarah couldn't turn back. She would fight for the truth for Bruno and for Officer Reynolds. But she wasn't alone in this fight. As the wind howled and set the barn doors creaking, a familiar pale light illuminated the dirt road outside. She couldn't pinpoint it, But something about tonight felt like a call to action with all the weight of an ominous, unresolved past. Bruno shifted beside her, sensing it too. That was when she heard the soft crunching of gravel beneath tires. Not more than a minute later, a truck rumbled into view, headlights cutting through the dark. It wasn't Grayson, not yet. She trained her eyes on the silhouette climbing out of the truck. It wasn't the sheriff. It was a figure she didn't expect, someone from the past. Dr. Colin. Sarah. Dr. Colin's voice broke through the night as she hurried toward Sarah, the furrow in her brow betraying an unmistakable sense of urgency. We have trouble. The chill crept up Sarah's spine. Trouble? What could that possibly mean? Behind her, Bruno growled low, a tender rumble from his chest that came from deep in his gut, like warning bells echoing through the night. There's more to this, Sarah. We need to talk. It's worse than we thought. Dr. Colin leaned in closer, further away from the night's eerie silence, all the while glancing over her shoulder, scanning for any signs of movement. I'm hearing whispers. I've been scanning the logs too, Dr. Colin continued, her eyes darting with apprehension. You need to understand this. Spike doesn't know just part of the story. She paused, her voice tightening. He's the living key to an unimaginable conspiracy. Sarah wiped her hands against her jeans. Her nerves had been stretched thin, and now they were snapping at the seams. I know he was a K9 to Victor Reynolds. There's more I need to learn, but what's going on? Dr. Colin barely met her eyes. Do you ever wonder why Spike's the only one from that raid who survived, Sarah? He was saved because someone cared, Sarah replied, eyes narrowing. Someone didn't just choose to throw him away like a tool. Dr. Colin nodded somberly. But there's a huge reason why he's triggered reactions in people. He remembers that raid. What he saw. Colin's voice almost dropped to a whisper. People in places of power want to bury what happened because it speaks to decisions higher than anything we could ever imagine, a betrayal that led to more murders. Before Sarah could respond, she heard the low growl again, closer, this time from Bruno. The crunch of gravel sounded louder. As they stared at him warily, he turned, his eyes a brilliant reflection of horror. Something beyond the ranch had caught his attention. Dr. Colin whispered, He's the real witness. Suddenly, a voice rough and clipped arched up behind them. Get inside, now. It was Grayson. The sheriff's figure was silhouetted in front of the truck, barely visible in the low glow. Time's running out. Whoever is after that dog knows you'd come here. And just like that, the two worlds collided. I'm not leaving you without them, Grayson. I won't let them get him, Sarah said resolutely. Their quiet stand against an old enemy, a web of betrayal, now found its climax. They needed Spike's memories, his knowledge. What he knew was more dangerous than anything Sarah could have imagined. It was happening. It couldn't be stopped. The threads of fate spiraling into rebellion and revelation. Liam from the past was there watching, and now they were coming for the truth again. Their jaws locked on a journey began, and headed nowhere idle, but directly toward collapse. For one M2S. Sarah Johnson's hands trembled as she held the phone close to her ear. In the hushed, sterile light of the veterinary clinic's private office, Dr. Colin's calm voice had just delivered a revelation that shattered the fragile hope Sarah had fought so hard to nurture. The microchip confirms it. Sarah Bruno is registered under your name, Dr. Colin said, her tone measured but laced with an undercurrent of sorrow. Before Sarah could gather her thoughts, a gruff voice cut through the silence. The man on the other end laughed bitterly. What dog? I got rid of him days ago, he sneered. Sarah's heart sank. The icy disdain in that voice sent chills down her spine, and her mind reeled as she tried to process his callous words. Got rid of him? She repeated, her voice barely audible, anger mingling with disbelief. You tied him to a tree and left him to die in the freezing cold? The man's laugh faded into a harsh snort. Lady, it's just a dog, he muttered, as if dismissing decades of Bruno's heroism and loyalty with a few callous words. Before Sarah could force out another plea, Dr. Colin gently retrieved the phone, her eyes softening with compassion. We'll take care of him, she said flatly, ending the call with a click that reverberated in the quiet room. For a long, painful moment, Sarah sat there, her heart hammering and her mind swirling with raw emotion. When Dr. Collin looked at her with a small, knowing smile, she murmured, "He's yours now." Sarah swallowed hard, her voice still raw. "He's mine," she whispered, determination seeping into every word. Just then, a soft whimper from the treatment room broke the tension. Sarah's head snapped toward the door, and without hesitation, she rushed back into the dimly lit corridor. There, on a padded table draped with warm blankets, lay Bruno, a once mighty German shepherd, whose heroic past was etched into every scar and strand of his graying fur. His body was frail, barely moving, yet his eyes were open, truly open for the first time. They were no longer dull or lifeless. Instead, they shone with a spark of recognition, as if he had been waiting all along for Sarah's touch. Sarah's throat tightened as she approached the table. Gently, she reached out and placed a trembling hand on Bruno's head. His weak tail gave a slight thump against the table, an almost imperceptible sign of life that filled her with both relief and an urgent need for answers. "You're safe now, buddy," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. The sight of Bruno, a dog once left to perish in the cruel elements, now clinging to life under her care, stirred within her a resolve to protect him at all costs. Later that evening, as the clinic's corridors grew quiet and the outside world succumbed to the dark Montana night, Sarah sat alone with Dorothy and Dr. Collin in a small, modest office. The three of them pored over the records, trying to piece together the mystery that had led to Bruno's abandonment. Dorothy's eyes, wary yet determined, glistened as she recalled the countless rumors that had swirled around town, rumors that a well-respected local businessman had once owned Bruno, only to cast him aside when he was no longer deemed useful. Dr. Collin confirmed the details with quiet authority. Bruno, the loyal companion who had once served proudly alongside Officer Victor Reynolds, had been deliberately discarded. "They say his owner never reported him missing, Doctor," Collin said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "He was abandoned to die in the bitter cold." Sarah's blood ran cold as she listened. The man on the phone had been part of that very circle, a man who now claimed he got rid of him days ago. The thought that someone in their own community could commit such cruelty was almost too much to bear. "I want to know who did this," Sarah declared, her voice firm despite the raw vulnerability that pulsed beneath it. "Bruno deserves so much more than to be treated like a disposable relic." Dorothy placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We'll find out the truth," she promised softly. "Sometimes, the darkest secrets are hidden in plain sight." With renewed resolve, Sarah decided that Bruno's next step in his journey would not be one of despair, but of revelation. The next morning, as the pale light of dawn crept over the Montana mountains, Sarah, accompanied by Dorothy and Dr. Collin, set out to confront the mystery head-on. Their first stop was the local sheriff's office, where Sheriff Grayson, an old friend known for his steadfast honesty, listened intently as Sarah recounted the call and the damning details of Bruno's past. Sheriff Grayson's expression grew somber as he confirmed that indeed, there had been no lost poster, no public outcry. The registered owner had simply vanished, leaving Bruno to wither in the cold. The investigation took them on a winding journey through local records, whispered conversations in dimly lit bars, and even a visit to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Each clue was as unpredictable as it was painful: a faded receipt, a half-burned document, a name that reappeared only to vanish into shadows. At every step, Bruno, though weak, remained ever alert. His eyes, dark and knowing, seemed to watch over Sarah like a silent guardian, urging her forward even when the path was fraught with danger. One evening, as the trio gathered in the quiet of Sarah's modest home, the weight of their findings pressed heavily upon them. Dr. Collin, whose scientific mind struggled to reconcile the cruelty they had uncovered with the inherent goodness of people, said, "This isn't just about Bruno. It's about exposing the neglect and betrayal that still festers in our community. We owe it to him and to all the animals who have suffered to shine a light on this darkness." Sarah, her eyes burning with a mix of sorrow and fierce determination, nodded. "Bruno's resilience taught me that no matter how much cruelty we face, we can always fight back with love. We're going to make sure his story isn't forgotten," she declared. In that moment, as the first rays of a hopeful sunrise filtered through the window, Sarah made a promise to herself to Bruno and to everyone who had ever been abandoned or betrayed that the truth would come to light. The investigation, unpredictable and fraught with suspense, was not merely about seeking justice for one dog. It was about reclaiming the dignity of every creature who had been cast aside. And in the quiet strength of their bond, Sarah found a reason to believe that even the darkest secrets could be unraveled by the light of compassion. As the day wore on and the community began to stir, Sarah, Dorothy, and Dr. Colin braced themselves for the challenges ahead. Their journey was only beginning a path paved with uncertainty, but also with the promise of redemption. With Bruno's steady, knowing eyes as their guide, they would face the shadows of the past head-on, determined to restore hope and honor the legacy of a loyal friend who had fought so hard to be remembered. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more tales that inspire and move us. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next story.